All right, welcome back. So we are now getting into the top six of the DPC throughout this past DPC season, of course. And there's actually two teams from South America in our top six, which before the season started, I don't know if many people would have predicted that. But truly and honestly, there are two teams in South America that seem like they're just head and shoulders above every other team in South America. And though sometimes it may seem like that gap isn't as large, sometimes those teams that are further behind, like Akori, like Infamous, are able to take a game or maybe a series off of one of the teams every now and then. They are truly nowhere near as dominant as Thunder, Awaken, and Beast Coast are in their own region, but also in other regions. And we'll take a look at that with Thunder Awaken, who has been the most dominant team within their own region for quite a long time now. So, how did they get here? How did they qualify? Well, they qualify off of DPC points alone. As I mentioned, they finished top 6. You need to finish top 12 in the DPC to qualify off points. They finished with 1,540 points, which is an astonishingly high amount. They finished second place regionally and sixth place internationally. And their roster is largely made up of players who have never been to TI before. This is a fairly inexperienced roster when it comes to playing at TI, besides their position 4 player Matthew, who has been to one TI before. That was back at TI7, but that was the only time. For the rest of them, we have Pakaz and Sacred, who are both on Unknown last year during the TI10 qualifiers. They missed out just barely, finishing second place in those qualifiers. Dark Mago and Panda Boo were both finishing fourth place in those qualifiers last year. That is the closest any of them have been to this point to the international. They have had some roster changes partway through the season. Oscar leaving after the first tour and the first regional finals when things didn't feel like they were working out all that well for Thunder Awaken. So they did make some changes. They lose 45 points for that, but in the grander scheme of things, it did not end up being very much. They would have qualified to TI regardless of whether or not they had made that change or not, or depending on which point in the season. Like if they had made that change even at the end of the season, they still would have qualified for TI off of points. And that is largely due to the amazing results that they've had in this past year, specifically in their own region, where they finished first place uncontested, meaning they didn't have to play any tiebreakers for that first place finish within their own regional tours every single time, all 3 times. Tour 1, 7-0, 300 DPC points right there. Fantastic. I believe they only dropped one individual game throughout that entire tour as well. However, they weren't able to translate that into regional final success, where, of course, throughout our first tour, we didn't have a major. We had those regional finals where the top 4 teams of each region played in a miniature bracket. They would win their first series, but then they would get knocked down to the lower bracket by Beast Coast and eventually knocked out of the tournament as a whole by Infamous, which obviously was not something that Thunder Awaken was going to be very satisfied with, and that prompted them to make their roster changes. Oscar would find himself off of the team. And things would pick up again pretty quickly. Again, another first place finish, going 7-0 once again. So at this point, they have yet to drop a series within their own regional tours. Of course, you can argue that the regional finals are within their own region as well, which is true. But the regional tours specifically, they are 14-0 to this point. Another 400 DPC points to add to their total. Heading into the Stockholm Major, we didn't really know all that much to expect with Thunder Awaken. We knew that they were very dominant in South America. We knew they were one of the top teams from South America coming into this, but with limited LAN experience, with their poor results in Tour 1 in the regional finals, how are they going to fare? Well, ultimately, they did pretty darn well for themselves. In the group stage, they go 2-3-1, and in fact, they tied 4 other teams in the group stage, and in that group stage, they won all 3 of the best-of-1 matches that they had, which got them into the upper bracket, where they would win a series, but then they would end up losing the next 2. But regardless, with that one series win, they qualify for top 6, earning themselves 385 more DPC points. So, although it's not maybe amazing, top 6 finish at a major is nothing to be scoffed at. There were no Chinese teams at that major, but still top 6 at a major nonetheless. Then in Tour 3, they keep up that momentum. First place finish in South America once again uncontested. They do drop one series. That would be the first series of the tour that they would drop, and then they would follow that up by winning 6 consecutively. But they earned themselves 500 more DPC points in total. So across all 3 tours, they went 20-1, which is ridiculous. But then at the Arlington Major, things just kind of fell apart. They just were not able to get out of the group stage. They were actually one of the few teams that got eliminated in the group stage. And they didn't even do all that badly, but it was just the fact that they didn't win a single series that really held them back. They had a lot of ties, a few losses, but just, again, not enough to get themselves ahead of the pack. So a bit of a setback for Thunder Awaken, but at this point, they were already well clear of the line. They were definitely going to qualify for TI, so it could have been that they just let off the gas a little bit. Totally possible. I can totally understand why some teams would maybe want to ease off on the pressure a little bit before heading into TI, just so they don't burn themselves out. And for Thunder Awaken and for their fans, I'm sure that they're hoping that's what the case is. Although this is a roster of players that is pretty new to the scene. Of course, Thunder Awaken is not new to TI. They went last year under their old tag, Thunder Predator, with a roster that looked pretty good heading into TI, and then it kind of fell apart at TI. They didn't even make it out of the group. So for the org's sake, for the fans' sake, they're hoping that this is not going to be a repeat of last year. So we'll see how that goes. Taking a look at their results against other teams attending this year's International, including teams at the Last Chance qualifiers, they played a total of 62 games against those teams, where they went 34-28, so a pretty good record overall. In Tour 1, again, we can see a clean sweep of all the other teams from South America attending TI that they had played in that tour. Tempest, of course, at that point, not quite in the upper division. 2-0 over Infamous, Hokori, and Beast Coast. However, in the regional finals, a 2-1 loss to Beast Coast and a 2-0 loss to Infamous. And if I'm not mistaken, that was the only time that they had lost to Beast Coast throughout the entire DPC season. Every other time they were able to beat Beast Coast 2-0. So Thunder Awaken, just in that particular point, you could see that vulnerability. And with those roster changes, they would get right back to the wins. 2-0 wins over Hokori, Infamous, and Beast Coast once again. Stockholm Major in the group stage, they would take down Team Liquid. They would then lose to Team Spirit. They then would draw the next 3 series, Fnatic, Gladiators, and TSM FTX. That would be the end of the group stage. But because there was a 4-way tie, I didn't have space to write it on here, but there were 3 more best of ones that they played against TSM FTX, against Team Spirit, and against Team Liquid. They won all 3 of those matches, which was super impressive, and it got them into the upper division, where they would face off at first against Bet Boom. They would win that series 2-1, but then they would not be able to take down the Giants from Western Europe. Tundra would knock them down to the lower division, and OG would eventually be the ones to knock them out 2-0. Heading into Tour 3, they would start off with a loss to Infamous. That would be 2-0, and that was the only loss that they suffered in their own regional tours throughout the entire year, but they would follow that up with some pretty quick wins. 2-1 over Hokori and 2-0 over both Tempest and Beast Coast. And at the Arlington Major, we can see here no wins, a lot of ties, but unfortunately not enough for them to get out of the group stage. A tie against Talon, Sonics, Fnatic, Virtus Pro, and Liquid, and losses to RNG, OG, and PSG LGD. And that would be the end of their tour. They would finish the end of their DPC season. They would finish things off with a loss against PSG LGD. Taking a look at their stats now across the entire DPC, they've played a total of 89 games, going 58-31. In those games. On Radiant, they were 41-22, and on Dire, they were 17-9. And as you can see here, their win rates were pretty remarkable. Didn't depend really on what side they are on, what pick order they were. They just had really, really remarkable win rates all across the board. But you can see that they were still favoring Radiant, given just the sheer volume of matches that they had there. First and last pick, however, was pretty much an exact even split, where they went 29-16 on first pick and 29-15 on last pick. For Radiant first pick, 25-14 on Radiant second pick, 16-8 on Dire first pick, 4-2. They only played that orientation 6 times, but again, it was still fantastic. And on Dire second pick, a 65% win rate in 20 games. For games that were less than 40 minutes, and this is where the huge disparity comes in, because Thunder Awaken plays a very pub stompy style of Dota. It is a Dota that is a little ugly at times. It's a true like beating up your opponent type of play style that they have, where they draft a bunch of heroes that it's not necessarily a technical draft that is going to come together in some great synergy. It's more of just a draft that will brawl you early, and if you start losing early against this team, they will win the game, and typically they do. In games less than 40 minutes, they are 44-15 for a 75% win rate, 1 game short of 75% win rate, which is ridiculous, especially when you compare it to their games that went over 40 minutes, where they had just less than half the games, just more than half the games, and they had more losses, 14 and 16, 47% win rate. So you can see that their play style is very much win now, and if you can't win in a certain amount of time, things start to fall apart. And again, that is largely due to that play style of run at you. They don't put as much thought into the synergy of their draft. They are just very, very good at coming ahead in lanes and winning those early fights. And certainly that is an effective way to play Dota. Not every team has to play Dota the same way. Thunder Awaken has shown that they're able to have a lot of success playing this way. It's going to be really interesting to see how that carries on into playing on the biggest stage in Dota against the best teams in the world. And I'm super stoked to see that. And game ones, they were 30 and 13. They were very strong at opening series with a quick win. However, in game twos, that win rate does come down a little bit to 23 and 17, but still quite positive. And in game threes, deciding game threes, they were 5 and 1 overall. The only game three that they would end up losing in the entire year would come in the regional finals, when they would get dropped down by Beast Coast in the upper bracket of those regional finals. For average GPM, they had a 23.11, average XPM 28.89, very, very high. Average KDA 4.68, tremendously high KDA. Again, their play style is very brutal. They will destroy you, and then the longer games go, typically that's when they start to struggle. Average match duration of 36 minutes and 8 seconds. For their hero stats, they picked a total of 68 different heroes, a very, very small number in comparison to other teams, especially given the sheer amount of games that they've played throughout this past year. Their most picked being Tiny with 27, Ogre Magi with 25, Snapfire with 24, Mars with 20, and then Kunkka and Abaddon with 19, and Templar Assassin with 18. Again, these guys play a very simplistic style of Dota. They don't really have some greater knowledge, I wouldn't say greater knowledge, but greater strategy in drafting. They just play what they're really comfortable with, and they will beat you with it. For their best heroes, Weaver, 12 and 0. Of course, Weaver was very, very popular near the start of the DPC season. I don't imagine the hero is going to be seen nearly as much at the International, but still a 12 and 0 record nonetheless. Incredibly impressive. Leshrac, 5 and 0. Abaddon, 17 and 2. That is also not a hero that we've seen very much across very many regions at all this past year. These guys made it work. It was a true comfort pick for them. Templar Assassin, 16 and 2. Ember Spirit and Morphling, 6 and 1. And Mars, 16 and 4. For their worst heroes, there really weren't all that many. Darkseer was 0 and 3. Zeus and Lich were 1 and 3. And then Pangolier was 3 and 6. Not even that bad for win rates. And for their most banned, Invoker with 28, Puck with 27, and Beastmaster with 25. So, Thunder Awaken. Heading into this year's TI, I have no doubt in my mind that these guys could very well end up in the upper bracket. I think these guys are that good. Their playstyle is simplistic, but effective, and we've seen this past year. But again, will the demons of the past be looming over these players? Thunder Predator, of course, last year struggled a lot in the group stage, and they looked very much like this team here heading into TI with a lot of momentum. And will they falter in that sense? Again, they ended off the season pretty rough, not even making it out of the group stage of Arlington. Was that a fluke? Was that just letting off the gas pedal for a bit just to avoid burnout? Or is it a sign of what's to come for Thunder Awaken? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll be having more previews going up. Next up should be Aster, and then after that we're getting into Beast Coast, and then past that point we're into the top 3 teams of the DPC this past year, which is super, super exciting. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. In case you've missed it, I've done previews for every single team attending TI other than the 2 that I mentioned plus the top 3. So if you want to check that out, check the link in the description as well as our Discord down there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later.